Here's a truth that no writer wants to admit. Your knowledge and expertise is useless if you don't know how to package it into clear writing. But when this expert, who had never written before, learned a few simple writing hacks from his friend, the legendary author Cormac McCarthy, it launched him from obscurity to a thought leader. His article got published in the Harvard Business Review, and over 20 years later, it's still one of their most read articles of all time. So in this video, I'm going to reveal 12 nonfiction writing hacks that helped this unknown researcher become a leader in his field. Because you can have the best idea in the world, but if people can't understand it, it might as well not exist. By the way, if you're new here, my name is William, I'm an English professor, and I help nonfiction writers write well. So if you want to learn about the art and science of expert writing, be sure to grab my free newsletter, Writer Science. Link is down below the like button. Meet W. Brian Arthur, an economist who figured out something huge back in the 90s. The only problem was that he didn't know how to write about it. He had cracked the code for why companies like Microsoft and then later Google and Facebook dominated the market. He called it increasing returns. And basically, the idea is the more people use a product, the better it gets, and that creates a snowball effect that locks them into the market. This idea explains how the entire internet economy works today. And if you've ever heard somebody talk about diminishing returns or increasing returns, it all links back to this article. But Arthur had a problem. He was a brilliant economist, but he wasn't a writer. So when he put down his big idea on paper, it was unreadable. So Arthur did something unusual. He sent the draft to his friend, Cormac McCarthy. Yes, the novelist who wrote The Road, No Country for Old Men, and Blood Meridian. McCarthy is the recipient of the Pulitzer Prize, the MacArthur Genius Grant, and he's widely regarded as one of the greatest writers of the 21st century. Arthur spent 4 days with Cormac McCarthy, reworking every sentence. McCarthy stripped away the academic clutter and rebuilt the article piece by piece using the same writing principles that made his novels so powerful, but adapting them for nonfiction. He transformed Arthur's draft into a clear, dramatic piece that people actually wanted to read. This is the piece stripped of all the words. It's just the punctuation. And it gives us an interesting thumbprint of the article and the style in which it was written. Now, there are a few things to notice here. One, like if you just look between the periods, which represent a sentence, you'll see there's not very much punctuation between them. That means that the sentences are constructed very simply. We don't have these long, expansive clauses or semicolons or anything like that. The thing to notice here is just the minimalism of it all, and McCarthy is famous for that. And McCarthy's tip here is to use minimalism to achieve clarity. McCarthy is ruthless with this. For every sentence he went over with Arthur, he would ask him, do you need to have that punctuation mark, that word, that sentence, that paragraph, that section? And they removed anything extra that they can. And of course, writing simply, like this is something that we hear a lot in writing advice, but I think when you look at a piece through this X-ray of looking just at the punctuation, you really get a sense for how the sentences are built. And in the case of Arthur and McCartney's article here, you're going to see that it's just so spare. They've really stripped away everything that they could. And why is that a good thing? Bring it back to the reader. Like, good writing is always a function of the reader's experience. It's the reader who decides what good writing is. And so the easier that it is for them to process the sentence, the better the writing is. So although this piece deals with quite a complex and abstract subject matter, the prose stays crystal clear and very sharp. And so I've annotated this article for us here, and I'm going to be pointing out a few different elements in it at the sentence level, at the paragraph level, at the kind of logical, organizational level. There's a lot that we can really learn from this, but one thing that I'd just like to point out at the beginning is the way this first paragraph is written, because I think it does such an expert job at setting up the problem and getting readers engaged in the unfolding. Like, you don't even really need to be interested in the question of markets and macroeconomics to appreciate this passage. So I'm going to read it for you, and I'm going to stop myself from jumping in with my commentary, and then I'm going to show you what I see going on here. So Here's the opening paragraph. Our understanding of how markets and businesses operate was passed down to us more than a century ago by a handful of European economists, Alfred Marshall in England and a few of his contemporaries on the continent. It is an understanding based squarely upon the assumption of diminishing returns. Products or companies that get ahead in a market eventually run into limitations, so that a predictable equilibrium of prices and market shares is reached. The theory was roughly valid for the bulk processing smokestack economy of Marshall's day, and it still thrives in today's economics textbooks. But steadily and continuously in this century, Western economies have undergone a transformation from bulk material manufacturing to design and use of technology, from processing of resources to processing of information, from application of raw energy to application of ideas. As this shift has occurred, the underlying mechanisms that determine economic behavior have shifted from ones of diminishing to ones of increasing returns. The thing that I really like about this opening passage is the way it sets up the problem. And one of the things that I teach in my creative nonfiction writing class is that for readers to read, they need to perceive the information as valuable. So one of the mistakes that a lot of writers fall into is that they just provide a ton of information and it's not really motivated towards anything that readers care about. So in order to, the idea, let's ground it in this essay, the idea that the writer, Arthur, wants the reader to care about is increasing returns. He wants everybody to understand how this idea is important. And so the way that he does that is by positioning it as the solution to a problem. So this first passage right here is just an expert example of problem construction. Look at the way that they set up a problem. I'm going to have some comments as well about, I have these different colors here, and I'm going to talk to you as well about the language choices. But the first thing I just want to track is the way, and I've highlighted this in red. So anything in red is a kind of key term for this problem construction. So first it starts off by saying our understanding of how markets and businesses operate was passed down to us. Okay, so this understanding is in the subject position. It's the thing that's being in question, and that thing was passed down to us. So that's an interesting choice of words because it's usually kind of raggedy clothes that are used clothes that are passed down from one elder sibling or something to another. So already they're not just giving background information of many people believe this idea, but already we're kind of talking about this idea as though it's, a used article of clothing or something. It was passed down to us more than a century ago. And that's valuable as well because it's telling us that it's a dated idea. So passed down to us more than a century ago, even this phrase by a handful of European economists. I mean, handful already sounds kind of diminutive, don't you think? So this first sentence, it's really doing a lot of work to kind of subtly tell the reader that, this old shabby idea is dated and that we need to update that idea. So it's passed down to us more than a century ago by a handful of economists, Alfred Marshall in England and a few of his contemporaries on the continent. It is an understanding based squarely upon the assumption. So all these words in red are what I call value words. These are words, especially for this audience, people reading the Harvard Business Review, they're instantly going to recognize that these ideas are dated, kind of, already used up by a handful of economists, and that they're based on an assumption. Okay, scientists don't like assumptions. So already the language is kind of positioning this idea as being invalid. So the theory was roughly valid. Okay, it had some credibility. One of the ways to understand the way this problem is being developed is to think about these elements. So there's the status quo, right? And that's the way that things are. So that's where the writer is telling us, here's what we think. And then a good move here is to give a concession. And that's what they do. If you're going to be introducing your idea, you don't just want to come in off the top ropes and say, this idea is trash. Everybody who believes it is stupid, right? You want to say it was roughly valid for that time. And then we have this word still. Now, still is still kind of setting the tone, right? To say that it still thrives in today's textbooks is to say that it persists. It's kind of still keeping on going. So all of this language is leading up to this one moment, which I call the destabilizing condition. And that destabilizing condition is going to overturn the status quo, right? It's going to tell the reader that there's something wrong with this idea. And the way that it's been written, our understanding even if, you're not an economist, the way that it's been presented to you is to say that you have an idea, right? You have a belief, and it's kind of a shabby belief that came to us a century ago by these guys over in England, and it was based on this assumption, right? And it was kind of valid for this time, and it's still popular in today's textbooks, but it's like, dun, dun, dun. But this is where everything transitions here. This is where we show what's wrong with that idea. But steadily and continuously in this century, so it came to us more than a century ago, but in this century, Western economists have undergone a transformation. And then we get very specific about what kind of a transformation that is. From bulk material manufacturing to design and use of technology. And then we get more focused on what those industries look like. And then here is the consequence, because now we've said what that transformation is. And so therefore, we need to update our economic behavior, our management practices, our strategies. And that's really important because it's taking this idea and it's applying it to the needs and interests of the readers of the Harvard Business Review. This isn't exactly an academic publication. It's read by a lot of business professionals and people who want to take the kind of new ideas of business and apply them in their own strategy. And so what you're going to find is that a lot of this article focuses on strategy, right? The practical applications of this. But this is what's known as a conceptual problem. A conceptual problem tells readers you have a misunderstanding or an incomplete understanding in the way that you understand this topic. And conceptual problems are upstream of practical problems. So once we understand this new model of, we replace the idea of diminishing returns with the new idea of increasing returns, well, now downstream of that, there are a number of business practices that we're going to have to adopt. So after the destabilizing condition, the author gives us the consequence and then the solution or the new idea. And these are the 5 pieces of a problem that I think are just done expertly in this opening right here. Now, a few other points about the language that I'd just like to point out. In the blue here, take a look at the consistency of these sentences. In blue, I've underlined the subject of these sentences. And notice the consistency, right? We go from our understanding of how it was passed down to us more than a century ago. It is an understanding based squarely upon the assumption, da-da-da-da-da. The theory, okay, now we have a synonym, but it's the same entity that's in the subject position. And it still thrives in today's economics textbooks. So that's what's called a topic string. The element that you put in the subject position, it's important. It tells the reader what to focus on. And I think a good metaphor for this is to think about a camera. If a paragraph is like a scene in a movie, well, then each sentence could be like a shot in that scene. And for the scene to be coherent and for, viewers to understand what's going on in the scene, there needs to be some choice, some attention given to the element that the director puts in the subject position. One thing you'll notice in unedited versions of writing is that writers can often vary their subjects. They're just not paying attention to what they put into the subject position. So I generally like to say that you're the writer, you're like a director. The thing that you should put in the subject position should be, you should make a choice about that and be consistent in it, because you're going to be building the reader's understanding of what you want them to think about that topic. So if you're varying wildly, it's kind of like, I don't know, you're at a tennis game and you're watching the ball go back and forth, or you're just watching a very chaotic movie where you don't really know what the point is of it all. So I think they do that expertly here, and you'll see this throughout the piece, the kind of attention that's given to what's in the subject position. And then in the green, what I'd like to point out is the use of concrete language. So keep in mind, we have here a very abstract subject matter. This is macroeconomics, and yet it's so easy for us to understand. And many of us will not be experts in economics who are watching this video. So how do they do that? Well, what I notice is anytime there is an abstract element given to us, it's always grounded in something material, something concrete. I like to tell my students concrete writing is something that the reader could stub their toe on. right? That's how you know you're talking about concrete things. And why is that important to do? Well, the part of our brain that evolved for vision is much older than the part that evolved for language. And so it's a lot easier for readers to understand what's going on if they can see it. It's not enough to just give them words. We have to ground it in something that they can see. And so in this case, Alfred Marshall comes in as a character to represent this whole abstraction, this whole school of belief, this understanding of how markets operate. The shorthand for that is Alfred Marshall. And there's a whole section down here where Alfred Marshall is going to be animated as kind of one of the main characters. He did this and he said that and that kind of thing. So every time we're given an abstract subject, it's grounded in something material. For an excellent example of this, let me just show you. So bulk processing, that is going to be a kind of recurring theme in this, something that represents the old world of business, right? This bulk processing. And so to really ground that, like if this just said bulk processing, you and I might not really know what that means. But right away, look at this. As soon as we get bulk processing, we're given a smokestack economy. And now you and I can see it. We know what they're talking about. Smokestacks, right? I'm picturing a whole era of industrial production. Right, so anytime, we're going to see this throughout the piece, anytime the writer is veering towards the abstract, it's grounded in something concrete. And that way they can, so we have now a setting. Like you can, if we were watching a play or a musical or something, the smokestack economy is the background set design. It's what gives us kind of context for understanding these more abstract elements. And actually, we see a good example of how this strategy of having a consistent element in the subject position done expertly in the next paragraph. Just watch how these sentences are constructed. And we're going to have to notice in the last 2 or 3 sentences, there are some subordinate clauses. Those provide context to the main clause. But what you're going to notice is that in the blue, every sentence, the subject of every sentence is the increasing returns. And so it says, increasing returns are the tendency for that which is ahead to get further ahead, for that which loses advantage to lose further advantage. They are mechanisms of positive feedback that operate within markets, businesses, and industries to reinforce that which gains success or aggravate that which suffers loss. Increasing returns generate not equilibrium, but instability. If a product or a company or a technology, one of many competing in a market, gets ahead by chance or clever strategy, increasing returns can magnify this advantage, and the product or company or technology can go on to lock in the market. More than causing products to become standards, increasing returns can cause businesses to work differently, and so although the passage has these subordinate clauses, such as more than this and if that, right? Although there are these subordinate clauses to kind of break up the flow of it all, the element that's in the subject position every single time is increasing returns. And this actually becomes the primary theme of this entire essay. It's really just about this new idea of increasing returns and the business strategies that go with it. And that fits the audience, the readership, and the context of this magazine perfectly. McCarthy told Arthur to decide on the theme of the paper and 2 or 3 points that you want every reader to remember. The theme and the points become the single thread that run through the piece, and the words and sentences and paragraphs are the needlework that hold it together. And this is a really important point to remember because I think a lot of writing advice focuses just on the sentences and the paragraphs. But with this image of the needlework and the thread, we start to see how these sentences are just the tools that are used to stitch together this larger pattern. The focus is the pattern, right? The theme. When you read this entire article, the theme will be clear. You've got the new world of increasing returns and the old world of decreasing returns. And you've got a few practical applications for business strategy. And really, aside from those 2 or 3 points, there's nothing else in this piece that could be cut out. Everything in here is necessary, and it all contributes to this single theme and the 2 or 3 kind of strategy points that go with that theme. And I think the next point to note here is the way the paragraphs are constructed. I always say that a paragraph is the unit of one idea, but in McCarthy's language, a paragraph is limited to a single message. So one idea or one message. And you can really do that. For every paragraph, you could really pause and ask yourself, what's the message? What's the single message in this paragraph, right? This one gives us a definition of increasing returns. This one tells us why increasing returns works, the mechanisms of it. Down here, we have Alfred Marshall's world of diminishing returns. You could interrogate every paragraph and you'd be able to label it. You'd be able to say, this is what this paragraph is about. And you could make a list of those functions of the different paragraphs and just kind of skim that list and it would be coherent. And that's an important thing to keep in mind is that, each paragraph has one job. Now, of course, with this definition of a paragraph, it follows that a single paragraph could be a single sentence. And just quickly scan here. Let's see if we have any examples of that. Yeah, why not? Oh, well, okay, almost here. This can also be pushed a little bit too far. There is, especially on the internet these days and kind of sub-publishing platforms like, Substack and newsletters and stuff, there is this formal aspect that comes up where writers are just writing, they're punctuating everything with a new line. I don't necessarily think that's advisable. I think writers should be parsimonious in the way they break up their ideas, but at the same time, you don't want to put everything on a new line because it looks like every single sentence is a new idea. So I think, in a few instances, we do see these very short, kind of truncated paragraphs, and that's because the function of that paragraph could be expressed in a single sentence. Usually, in this case, it looks like these much shorter paragraphs are used to set up, the next idea, usually transitioning into the next section. Now, one interesting formal aspect of these paragraphs is we see a lot of them open up with a question. Just find an example of that. They're all over the place, right? What would happen? What would happen if Marshall's diminishing returns were reversed so that they were increasing returns? Right? And I've underlined this in blue because I just kind of noticed how endearing it is for the writer to use questions in this way. Like, rhetorical questions can be misused, but the way they're deployed in this section is a way of bringing the reader into conversation. Like we see a lot of let's look, right? We see let's look, our understanding, right? Like, what is that doing? Why is he using this kind of formal tone to construct these ideas? Because in these more, formal publications like Harvard Business Review or wherever it is you might like to publish, there is some lore about the use of formal language. They say you should never say I and you shouldn't say you and all of that kind of thing. There's a reason for that writing advice, but here in this case, I think what this language feature achieves is inviting the reader to look at the world. It's kind of like calling the reader alongside the writer. So they're not arguing with you. They're not badgering you with this idea. They're not saying, hey, reader, you have the wrong understanding. It's more inviting and welcoming. It's more saying, reader, we have been led astray, right? We have been shown this idea and it came from those people. But now look, right? Look at this, reader. And why do you suppose such and such is in this way, right? Asking these questions. It's very conversational and it's a great tone to use whenever you are doing what's essentially persuasion, right? That's what the writer's doing. The ultimate function of this piece is to persuade readers that this old idea of diminishing returns is wrong and that this new idea of increasing returns is right. But if you write in the kind of traditional argumentative style, then you can put readers on their back foot. So this is so these questions and these, personal pronouns and these verbs, let's look at the market and cast your eyes over here. It's very inviting and very warm and very welcoming. And it's very effective for the purpose of this piece, which is persuasion. And so that's very warm and very inviting. But now look at what happens whenever, we start illustrating this idea. Let's look at the market for operating systems, right? We introduce a question here, right? What if products got ahead, thereby got further ahead? How would markets work? Well, right away, without making an abstract argument, we go into a concrete example, one that will be quite familiar to the readers of this magazine in, 1996? Yeah, August 96. So these examples are going to be quite familiar, Apple and DOS and IBM. It's a little bit dated for our purposes, but the point here is that the example was chosen because it will be directly relevant, and the readers will be aware of this story. And that story is being used as an example of the point that they're making. So take a look. We have here a kind of anecdote about what happened to Apple and IBM. And then at the bottom of that, it's summed up into the principles that he wants us to see. That history is now well known, but notice several things. Look at this language. Notice several things. Let's look at this. Notice that, right? It's very visceral, but notice several things. It was not predictable in advance. Once they got ahead, they got locked in the market. The dominant system was not the best. And once they got locked in, its sponsor was able to spread its costs among a large base of users. The company enjoyed killer margins. And now look, that explanation of the example is now summed up with these key concepts that are going to be used again and again and again throughout the piece, right? Market instability, this first sentence here. Multiple potential outcomes. It was not predictable in advance which system would come to dominate. The possible prominence of an inferior product. The dominant system was not the best. So the kind of key observations in this section were summed up with these concepts that the writer will then deploy again and again. So this is just brilliant. Look at the way it's deployed. We're asked a question. We're recounted a story. The key elements of that story are summed up, one sentence each, and each of those sentences are then packaged into, this is chunking, right? We go from a familiar story into now these concepts. And anytime you see market instability, anytime you see the word unpredictability, it's going to link back up to that story, right? And now look at I changed it in blue here. They surprised me when I first perceived them in the 1970s, right? This personal language, again, this is a very kind of unusual tone to find in an academic article. They surprised me. But again, it brings us in to the writer's side of the story, right? We're sitting on the same side of the table as the writer, and we're looking at this world that the writer has gone through. And, here's an economist that many of the readers will be familiar with. Hicks warned about this thing, but Hicks had it wrong. So this is telling readers the value, because some readers at this point might say, oh yeah, well, this idea isn't new. It was predicted by Hicks in the 1939. But here, the writer is saying Hicks had it wrong, right? It's not going to destroy the standard theory. It complements it. So again, this is value language. This is showing the reader why these ideas are important. I just love the concrete language that's used throughout this piece, right? We're not told about two paradigms or two modes of markets. We're told about two economic regions or worlds. These are things that you can see. There's the world of bulk production and the knowledge-based part of the economy. And I think the other good thing about the way the writer is developing these concepts is to keep in mind that they're used later on. I almost think about concepts in this way, like pieces on a board, like a chess game or something like that. And so the writer's doing this work, right? They tell us story, they analyze that story, they package that analysis into concepts, and now they do that for a reason. Now these pieces are going to be moved throughout the rest of the piece. And so similarly here, we're given this image of these two worlds. There's the bulk production world and the knowledge-based world. And now look what happens. We have we have, let us look at the two cultures of competition in the bulk processing world, and then down here in the knowledge-based world. So these concepts are always linking back up. These pieces keep on recurring and moving, and that's what gives the whole piece coherence. And then down here in the green, we have an expert use of kind of an example, like a concrete, it's an example of this concrete language, but what it really is what's known as an intuition pump. An intuition pump is better than an example, because an example is just giving you some evidence, it's giving you an illustration, but an intuition pump is putting readers into kind of the detective position. Like, he's posing a question. He's trying to answer something up here. Does this mean that the hierarchy should disappear in these industries? And it puts, rather than arguing something that the writer has already figured out, the writer provides us this image that we can then imagine and put ourselves in the position of thinking through, so that we can see what the writer wants us to see. And so look at the way the writer does that. We're given these intuition pumps. An aircraft's safe arrival depends on the captain, not on the flight attendants. The cabin crew can be usefully empowered and treated as human beings. This approach is wise and proper, but there will be a distinction, a hierarchy between cockpit and cabin crews. This is a metaphor, an intuition for how businesses in the bulk processing world work. A style that is called for in Silicon Valley will not necessarily be appropriate in the processing world. And so then he says, the style in the world of diminishing returns is like a sophisticated modern factory, whereas the style in the world of increasing returns is more like gambling. And then we have an extended metaphor here, right? Not poker, where the game is static. It's more like casino gambling, where part of the game is to choose which games to play, as well as playing them with skill. It's not this abstract kind of esoteric business philosophy. He's saying to readers, like, in this new world, it's not like you're in a factory. It's more like you're in a casino. And that's an intuition pump. That's something that readers can, grab onto, put themselves in the position of knowing, and really think through the implications of what they're being told. I mean, there are so many different things you could say here. Look, just the choice of verbs sometimes I think is really interesting, right? It pays to hit the market first, and it pays to have superb technology. We see that elsewhere too, right? It pays. So again, this is language that's chosen to resonate with their specific readers, right? They're using examples and keywords such as strategy to signal value. That's something as well that I teach in my nonfiction class, is that of course there are universal words to signal value, such as mistake, even that transition word but. As we saw at the beginning, that's kind of a universal signal of value. Okay, so all these red words are value signals, I think. But there are also community-specific value words. And that's something that's really important, is to understand your reader and understand what words are going to signal value to them. Depending on what niche you're writing for and who your reader is, every group has their own code words, their own in-group signals of value. And so one way to do this is to choose 4 or 5 examples of pieces that are popular and widespread among your readers, and to just look for words like this. Like, why is this piece so valuable? You almost have to treat it like you're an anthropologist or something. You're looking through this language for their own in-group code words. And so, those words, strategy and using verbs like it pays, that is going to hit a ka-ching in the back of the mind of one of these readers in a way that for me and you, we might not notice it quite as much. And again, look at this language. Let's get a little bit more sophisticated. God, it's so inviting. And it kind of positions the reader and writer into this relationship of equal footing. Now I'm thinking of the introduction to that T.S. Eliot poem, Proof Rock. Let us go then, you and I. Right? Let us go, reader, you and I, and let us look at these two worlds of business. That's what this kind of language does. It's very endearing, and it's very effective for this mode of persuasion. And take a look at how this entire structure is reflected in the structure of that opening paragraph. We set up the problem here. Here's the destabilizing condition, right? There has been a transformation, and then as this shift has occurred, the underlying mechanisms that determine economic behavior, right? So this second part of the piece, the mechanisms that determine economic behavior, have also shifted. So we have a description of increasing returns, then we talk about the mechanisms, and then even this structure. Look at this. I love this. Introduction, subpoint, here's what economic returns are, subpoint, mechanisms of economic returns. We see that reflected in the opening here, right? We see here's what increasing returns is, right? It's this transformation to design and use of technology. So here's what it is. That sentence opens up here. And then the final sentence, as the shift has occurred, the underlying mechanisms that determine economic behavior. Well, that shift has opened up here. So what an expert piece. And that's it. And these call for different understandings, which links back to the opening word. This is such an incredible piece, and there's so much more that I could say about this. But I think the most important thing to say about it is just that it's fun. You know, this is a wonderful piece. It brings the reader on a journey. I feel like there's a character in this talking to me. And by the time you finish reading it, you feel like you've seen something new. You've been somewhere new, and you look at the world in a new way. That is wonderful writing, and it's a wonderful reading experience. And I think that's why this piece has become one of the most popular pieces of all time ever published in the Harvard Business Review. It's important that we writers find some pleasure and joy in writing, the way that I think McCarthy showed Arthur how to do. But a lot of would-be writers actually hate writing because of the writing process itself. But the fact is that the writing process isn't one process. It's two. So to learn how to develop a writing practice that serves both you and your readers, watch this video next, because it's going to give you a step-by-step system that you can use to go from idea to hitting publish that'll help you build a serious readership. So be sure to go check it out.